Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking in a general sense about attacks on networks like Tor and I2P, along with LokiNet, Freenet, and others, and in a general sense, how these attacks may work, and also what's being done about it. And my motivation behind making this video is because a lot of times I'll see comments from people who don't understand either of these networks. And a lot of times they'll say, well, what about all of the attacks? What about malicious nodes? What about not being encrypted from the exit point to the destination? And I'm going to try and cover those bases today. We're just going to be talking about this article, which is an article that came out in 2023, February, on bleepingcomputer.com about the denial of service attacks that have been hitting the Tor and I2P networks. And they still are having these types of attacks on and off. And I'm going to talk a little bit in, like I said, in a general sense, because these are completely different networks. It might just get confusing if I jump around. So I'm just going to be talking in a general sense of how attacks may happen and should you be worried about it. And that's the basis for this video. So let's talk a little bit about the attacks. And apparently a malicious party or multiple parties was running a large number of malicious nodes. And that is how they perform denial of service attacks. So by understanding how these networks work, so when we look at the Tor network, you are here. When you make your connection, the Tor client actually connects to a random node, an entry guard, or a bridge. If you selected a bridge, which is an unlisted entry guard or entry node, it may also be referred to that as well. And then another randomly chosen node is selected out of the bunch. And keep in mind, this photo doesn't really show the whole picture. This is just showing a single destination. So we can also take a look at I2P. This is also showing a single destination. So you have to keep in mind that this only shows a few nodes because it's only a single destination. In reality, this is mixed into a massive number of nodes. So for example, there's something like tens of thousands of I2P routers and users, which the users also act as the routers. And for the tunnels, this is sending data this way, this is receiving. So it only sends through here and then it receives through here, for example. When we look at attacks, and the goal of an attack is to de-anonymize or to otherwise manipulate the traffic. And what would you do to do that? Well, the easiest thing to do, well, I wouldn't call it easy, but the quickest path to manipulating the network or trying to de-anonymize a user may be to run as many malicious relays or malicious I2P routers as you can. And there is some action being taken. So another thing I feel most people aren't aware of that are users of the networks or afraid to be users of the networks is they don't understand that there's actual action being taken to mitigate against these attacks. And that's something I also wanted to cover today. Another big reason for doing this video is to hopefully reassure people who are considering trying it but afraid to try it. You really have no reason to be afraid to try it. This is a much bigger network than what we're seeing here. So, we're talking massive haystacks and tiny needle, that is the users, that are hiding amongst those haystacks. And really, it's not hiding, it's just protecting your connection from malicious, unethical mass surveillance parties, which could also be behind these attacks. The motive is there if you want to perform and benefit and profit from mass surveillance. Of course, these are the types of networks that get in your way. I do not know that. I don't have any knowledge of that, but actually being the party behind it, I'm not claiming to know who's doing these attacks, but I'm just hypothetically speaking that parties like different, possibly even governments that are against anonymity software. For example, maybe a year or two before the attack, there was major censorship over in Russia. I have no idea if there's any connection there, of course, but there have been attacks also, by the U.S., of course. There's attacks on anonymity and these types of networks because, how can you collect the data if they're anonymous? So we see that this is an example where a malicious guard was run. So say someone sets up a router and they want to be a part of the network, but they are a malicious party. Well, ideally, they wouldn't just have one. They'd want to have control of as many as possible. Now, if they controlled the entry that the user was using, which is all randomly chosen, keep in mind there are thousands and thousands of these routers to choose from. So it's a randomly chosen connection, and it's a much bigger picture than what we're seeing here. We're only looking at one user in this picture. Same with this one. We're only looking at one user here. And so when we look at this picture, we're not seeing that it is much harder than just, controlling this section. The person who is the malicious party would have to get enough control that they would actually be part of the same tunnel or circuit. So if it was Tor, it would be a circuit, and then if they were able to have and run the exit node and the entry, that could be an issue, of course, because they would then be able to see the contact destination. The exit relay also performs the DNS as well. So the DNS, of course, is going to be doing the resolving of the domain. And that's another thing that is mentioned in some of the criteria about broken DNS for Tor project. So they're doing things about this. This isn't something that's just going on and out of control. I'm not saying it's not a problem, because of course it's a problem if it's happening. But at least they're doing things about it, and that is definitely something they're trying to do, is build more of a close-knit community with the relay operators, which is another thing they're also doing. And having a more secure DNS option. For example, if you look into some of the research on attacks, the majority of the DNS of some of the exit nodes in the year 2016 was Google. So Google had a large swath of the DNS resolves for users on the Tor network. Keep in mind, there's millions and millions of users on the Tor network. So when you look at these attacks, you have to understand that there are a million users mixed in here, and there are thousands of nodes randomly chosen. So the chances of being affected by attack are really none, pretty much. Of course, there's always a possibility, but, and there's all kinds of different attacks. For example, if they were able to knock out one of the routers in your connection, that could also be correlated to you if your connection gets broken. So if they're able to monitor a point here or here, and they're able to knock something out, or even knock out the destination website, the onion address. That's another type of attack that can happen. When we're talking in a general sense, again, the same types of attacks on both networks in a general sense. So if they were looking to de-anonymize a hidden service, if that hidden service only had one server, well, if it were knocked offline, say a power outage, something like that, that could then be used to correlate the actual location. So that's by a party that has the access to all of this types of information. This is not your average company that's going to have this type of access. And, really, those who host these kinds of sites are generally not just using one server anyway. They're not going to be vulnerable to those types of attacks. So if you, feel that you need to use multiple servers, go right ahead and do that. If you're a journalist that you feel your work is so, private, it needs to be secured by multiple different hosting locations, that's another thing some people might incorporate. And so when you look at the attacks on a broader scale, there's been a lot of cracking down on the attacks. So it's not just that. And it's also things like large file transfers. If you're doing large file transfers, that's another thing that you are warned about. because if you're doing a huge file transfer, you may stand out against other users on the network that are not doing large transfers. And also, it could actually be correlated with some of the nodes as well. So if there's a destination as well that's taking large transfers and there's a user that is doing an equal transfer, well, that of course could be correlated. So there's a lot of things to pay attention to. I actually did a video on this, and there's also timing attacks. There's all different types of attacks, but in a general sense, I really wanted to talk about, you actually are safe on these networks. It's completely safe to use Tor browser. It's completely safe to use I2P as well. And these are networks I've used for years and years and years. And, I2P I've gotten more into recently. I tried it years ago. Didn't get into it years ago, but I've been really getting into it lately. So I really love both networks. I don't think they're in competition at all. I think they complement each other. In fact, when you consider the fact that the more places you are, the more diverse your tool set, of course that enhances your privacy and anonymity online, because you're not standing in one place. And when you're using a diverse tool set, you're broadening your tool set and you're broadening your skill set, and you're also making it more difficult to track things, especially when things are randomized and changed in the way that they are. When we talk about attacks on I2P, there was something that was unique about this attack. It did appear to target I2PD routers, or maybe there were different mitigations for the Java version. So as we see, flooding the network with malicious flood fill routers, which is another thing that was being done on the I2P network. But, we have also this report on the attacks that came out 11 months ago, and there's some logs that were shared on Reddit about the attacks, and they gave some details. If you ever want to learn more about what's happening with I2P, check out the IRC server. So when you connect to the I2P network, the I2P router, as you can see, I have it right here. So when you connect to this, you'll also have a tunnel for IRC. So you'll be able to actually connect to IRC at localhost port 6668 with SSL turned off. As you can see, my bandwidth sharing here, but you can also see the peers here. So these are other I2P routers that are out there in the world. And relating it to the attacks on the networks, we can see that they are doing something about this. So not just Tor Project, but I2P networks also doing something about this. You can see that they have, at this moment, banned 4,976 routers. And how do they determine that? Well, there's numerous ways you can determine it. And what's really cool inside this Java I2P Plus I'm running is you can check out something called Sybil analysis. Now, what is Sybil? Sybil is a type of attack that is based on the running of multiple different identities, and it actually is derived from a psychological behavior issue where someone has multiple different identities. And I'm going to let you check out some of these things on your own, because some of these links are going to reveal my IP address, and I don't really want to reveal that here. So we could take a quick look at one of them. As long as my IP address doesn't pop up, it'll show up on the video. So I don't want to reveal anyone else's sensitive information either, but we can see why the 4,981 routers are banned, and you should feel good about this, because that means that there's something actually being done about it. So when you read about the attacks, don't let it scare you, because there's something actually being done, in the best way you can handle it. You can even unban things on your own, so you have that control. You can click here and you can actually unban if you wanted to. So for your connections, you can actually unban it. So you can see the reasoning for the ban as well. So you can see this has a temporary ban that expires in 176 minutes. And you can see that the version was old. And because the version was old, that was something that stood out. It's one of those kinds of markers that are used to determine if it could be a malicious I2P router. And so when you see these attacks, don't let it scare you. Like I said, don't let it scare you, because really there's something being done about it, and that should make you feel better because you know there's actually things being done on both networks. So with the Tor project, they have a lot of things that they're working on as well, things like proof of work as well. That's one mitigation they have for certain types of attacks. And the I2P network also has different types of bans, temporary bans in most cases, unless there are repeated bad attempts. So if someone is running a modified router, so some of these say older, this one says an invalid hash, so different behavior that doesn't match what an I2P router should be doing on the network could get that router temporarily banned. And if repeated behaviors come on, that could cause a permanent ban. As you can see, this one has an invalid hash and is permanently banned. So the point of this video is just to talk about, in a general sense, attacks on these networks and how they try to de-anonymize users and routers in order to make the network appear less secure. And these kinds of things are also open to FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and these types of stories really help spread that. So I thought making this video maybe will open people's eyes to the fact that these aren't just attacks going on, undeterred. There's actual action being taken there, and you can take a look at, which ones are banned for what reason. And like I said, I'll let you explore some of this on your own because I don't want to reveal any personal information for myself or others either. So that's pretty cool that you can actually take a look and you can see the actual Sybil analysis. You can take a look at it yourself. You can run a new analysis as well. So that's another neat thing about I2P, and also, Tor is also working on it, which they have criteria for it. So if you have a misconfigured exit relay, because you're relying on that exit relay to handle the DNS, and, it's always a good idea to use a secure DNS option, but also to check on broken certificates as you load pages. So when people try to say you shouldn't use Tor because there's no encryption here from the exit to the destination, you could say the same thing about I2P out proxies, but here's the good news. The good news is you still have HTTPS. So you are here. You have a browser that's handling encryption and is wrapping a layer of encryption between you and the destination. So even if there's no encryption between the exit point and the destination, it doesn't matter as long as you're using HTTPS. Now, on the other hand, if you're seeing certificate errors, that exit point could be trying to attack you. So really all you have to do is make sure this stays secure right here. Make sure you can even verify the fingerprint as well for the certificate for the destination. And if you're working with an end-to-end encrypted messenger, you're already encrypting it as well over top. So you don't have to worry about the fact that it is not encrypted. There were days in the past when there were simple HTTP websites that didn't utilize encryption. In those days, you might have been concerned about this, but this is not something that should worry you at all today because of the fact that we have HTTPS on a vast majority of the internet, and pretty much anything you're going to visit is going to be using HTTPS. So you can feel secure as long as you know the certificate is valid. Now, of course, there are other things and topics I've covered like malicious certificate authorities, malicious certificates in general. So do check out those videos if you have interest in that. But if you're using end-to-end encryption on an encrypted messenger, you really have no concern as long as you're checking key fingerprints and they are matching up for you. So that's just another thing to sweep out of the way. We can take a look at some of the types of symptoms that a malicious relay may give off according to the Tor network. This is the same type of thing you will find as an attack on the I2P network. So when you're seeing it lying about DNS resolutions, which is a DNS poisoning attack, and just as I had just covered, the SSL stripping, which is where someone's trying to manipulate that certificate, which the only person that's going to be able to do that is the exit node or exit relay. Same with I2P. And I have not had a single certificate error using Stormy Cloud Cloud's out proxy, or the other out proxies for that matter. Now, Stormy Cloud's the default out proxy for I2P, and one thing that Tor does have is more exit nodes, of course, but we're talking about two entirely different networks, and I2P has strengths as well. Every single user is also a router. Tor can't say that. You can do something to help, and you can help enhance the Tor network just as well. So, of course, just running an I2P router and opening UPnP, Universal Plug and Play, is going to help you get that green status. And if you want to help the Tor network, I actually wrote up a automated installer so you can become a dedicated bridge to the Tor network. So you can actually help people that are in areas where Tor is banned. You can help them connect. Simply run the install.sh. I also included an upgrade command, so you can upgrade it if you use this to install it. You can also use this also to upgrade it later. Just run install.sh again and use upgrade as the argument, and you'll have it upgraded. It also uses a dedicated user with no shell and a service file that helps ensure that it stays running even on reboot. So check that out if you want to be part of the solution. More bridges, the better. That is one of the best ways you can help the network, and it's also a lot lower of a barrier than becoming another type of relay. So try out a bridge. If you want to be a relay, start with a bridge. You can even install in your browser. There's an extension in your browser on Firefox and on Chromium. You can install the Snowflake extension and become a part of the solution that way. I'm also going to be talking about how you can do that on the I2P network as well. But for I2P, it's really simple. Just run the router, whether it's the I2PD, which I also love to use, and I'll be covering more on I2PD in coming content. Covered a little bit on it, but I'd like to cover more on it because it is a good option for a single board computer. But I do really enjoy the Java I2P Plus. It's just got a lot of options and things to play with, and it gives you a great outlook into the network as well. But both are excellent options, and if you want to have a dedicated single board computer I2P router, check out I2PD. It's definitely lightweight and it'll really help the network. Just by running the router, you're going to be a big part of the solution. You don't even have to use it. But the more you use it, the more you help add traffic to the network. And by using it, you actually are helping not only others, but you're helping your own anonymity. Just by using more often for more things, you're going to actually end up increasing your own anonymity. So back to the criteria for nodes, which we can also take a look at and also compare as different factors we could think about for the I2P network as well. So these networks, like I said, they really do complement one another. It's not a competition. They're both definitely great networks, great options to play with, and they're just more tools in our toolbox. So if you flood the network with new relays, so talking about Sybil attacks again, as mentioned, it's derived from the psychological profile of having multiple different identities. So you may have a single operator that sets up many different Tor routers or I2P routers. And they can use those to try and manipulate the network, and they may modify the router software in order to automate manipulating the network on a larger scale. And that's another reason that the Sybil analysis shows that having a bad version is going to cause a ban. And I think that's great. And I also think it's really cool that they're sharing this with the users. So you can actually take a look at this. You shouldn't let it scare you at all. But you can also take a look at which routers have the same IP address, things like that. All these things could be a sign of an attacker, but it definitely doesn't mean that's what it is. Because, of course, I'm going to run multiple I2P routers. I might have one on my desktop that I might use for browsing, and I might have a dedicated server, for example, that I might host something on. So just because there's more than one I2P router on a single IP address, two of them, I don't think is a big deal. Now, when you start running into 10 routers on the same IP address, you might want to take a closer look. So as you can see, you can take a look at periodic analysis. I could hit this and I could run a new analysis right now. You can also see which ones are part of the same router family. You can see also if they're doing bad lookups. So if the DNS is not right, you'll also see that. As mentioned, I don't want to reveal too much personal information, so I'm not going to click on these right now, but I do recommend checking them out. And they've also put a lot of consideration into their actual wiki here. So they talk about how it may not be an attack. You know, there may be somebody who's new at running a relay. They might just not understand how to properly configure the families for the relays. And so it could be an innocent mistake. And that's just like where we talked about some of these temporary bans. So when you look at the bans and you see the banned routers, some of them with some wrong behavior or settings might be innocent enough if it's not actually an ongoing issue. Of course, eventually they're going to need to figure out how to configure it properly, or they're probably going to be removed. For example, there was a group that was operating, I think it was called A-Tor, that was recently a story, and that A-Tor was helping people set up Tor relays. Now, could it have been something else? It could have. But we really don't know. It could have been an innocent project that really wanted to help the Tor network. That's a very possible thing as well. But their plans didn't exactly coincide with the Tor project, according to the Tor project's report on why they removed the routers. But it also could have been, and this is hypothetical, it could have been manipulated relay code that could have manipulated the way traffic is traversed through the network. And that could then help fingerprint things using different types of correlation, and that can also, leak out different things. And there's several things that if you're trying to be anonymous on the internet, of course you're going to need to keep track of metadata. You're going to need to keep track of things like your EXIF data in your media files. So different types of media files are going to also have things like tags that may reveal information about you that you didn't intend to reveal. Could even have serial numbers. Some pictures may have your GPS in them, so make sure you disable GPS on your camera for your phone, and also make sure that you are either spoofing the tags or you are just not writing EXIF data to those media files. Now, a better option may be to spoof the tags, but that could also be a fingerprint. If they're all spoofed the same, that's just yet another fingerprint. So there's a lot of things to consider with safety on networks like Tor and I2P. And today I just wanted to cover some of the issues that have come up the last couple years and how I have found that a lot of these stories scare users, and some of them just don't know if it's safe to use it. Now, of course, you should always consider if something is right for your circumstances and use cases. So if you are in a dangerous situation, in a dangerous part of the world, you should always consider how you use something and is it the right tool for the job. That goes for everything. But, just wanted to talk a little bit about these attacks today just because I thought it was pretty neat to see the Sybil analysis inside the I2P router, and I did want to cover that. That's what I have today, guys. Make sure to subscribe over at the blog at bmc.link/politictech, and you can follow also now on I2P at righttoprivacy.i2p. Make sure to share the video, like it, leave a like. A lot of people don't leave likes. I think I have something like under 5% likes, so make sure to give this video a like, leave a comment, and help the algorithm, and I'll be back later with more on how to protect your privacy and security.
supposed to feel.